Marissa here, back with another video, and today we're having a little bit of a short story time. So, based on previous videos, you probably know that I am an advocate for mental health and optimizing your mental health, focusing on yourself, practicing self care, acknowledging that things are going to happen, and figuring out ways to cope for it. But today we're going to talk about one of the lowest points in my life as far as my mental health goes. So I am from Charlotte, North Carolina, born and raised, and I work in the public health field as I previously mentioned. And coming straight out of grad school, the pay was crap, okay? So my first job out of grad school, I was only making like $38,000 a year. And so I knew that I wouldn't be in this position for a long time, but it at least was a pretty good start. I was able to move out on my own and pay my bills and all of that. What a time to be alive, right? Being able to survive off of $37,000 a year. But I was able to move out, get my own apartment, all of that. But I wasn't really a fan of the job. It wasn't really working for me. Like the management was not managing the way I wanted it to. And so essentially, one of the leadership staff told me that if I didn't like my job, that I should just go find another one. So after hearing that, I'm like, bet. So within like 6 months of her telling me that, I found another job and I was out. That job was in Baltimore, Maryland. So other than going to college in Winston-Salem, for the most part, I've lived in Charlotte my entire life, except for these 2 years that I moved to Maryland for a new job where I worked in college health. And when I was in grad school, I worked in the Center for Wellness Promotion on campus as a graduate assistant and had gained 2 years of experience working in college health. So that helped me to get another college campus job focused in public health and health education. So I was nervous, but also excited about going to another state and living in Maryland, despite only living in North Carolina for all of my life. This was in summer of 2017. So I moved to Maryland. I went up one weekend. At the time, my god sister was doing, I guess you would consider it kind of like a residency or like a fellowship after her PhD program, and lived in Baltimore at the time, but she was about to come back to Charlotte. So it's kind of like we were switching places. While she was still up there, I went for a weekend and looked around at apartments and decided on an apartment to apply for. Mind you, this move required me to break my lease in Charlotte. And so thousands of dollars out of my pocket. My mom helped me to pay to break my lease. Shout out to you, Mom. She's always so supportive. Love her so much. I love that lady so much. She's so nice. She's so sweet. Anywho, so I broke my lease in Charlotte, found an apartment in Maryland, and applied, was approved, all of that. And so I was set to start my new job in July of 2017, and I moved the last weekend of June 2017. So I lived in Baltimore County on the outskirts of the city. I felt like it was safer, a little bit slower, way more affordable than staying in the city and like staying uptown. So I stayed on the outskirts in the county. And of course, I lived by myself, one bedroom apartment. I knew a couple of people through some of the roles that I had professionally. So I trained for the National Summer Enrichment Program Freedom Schools, and I met people while training who were also trainers. And through doing that experience, knew people who lived in Baltimore or in the Maryland area. And so that was pretty cool, not being completely alone. But as my mental health started to deteriorate, that didn't really help all that much. I'll tell you about it in a little while. So I moved to Maryland, started my job. I liked it. It was cool. It was a nice little pay increase, by almost like $10,000. So at this point, I'm making the high 40,000. Still not a whole lot, which started to weigh on me later down in the story, but it was cool to increase my salary as I moved on to this new role. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed engaging with college age students, all types of different health programming. We focused on mental health, healthy relationships, prevention of alcohol and drug use, sexual health. People came to my office and just randomly talked to me. I oversaw the peer health educators on campus. So essentially, they were an extension of me, and they went out and did programming on campus for dorms, for student organizations. We held different types of programming and different sessions to focus on specific topics, like if they were around finals time, we would have stress reduction workshops, things like that, just ways to support students in their overall health and well-being. I enjoyed my job. However, as time progressed, the more that I worked on stuff and the more I was getting my income, the more it was feeling like this is a really big financial burden. Maryland is not cheap. And I was thinking it's cheaper at home. Who knew that Charlotte would be just as expensive as Baltimore was now? But back then, it was still cheaper to live in Charlotte than it was to live in Maryland. So that was weighing on me. And then on top of that, I don't have any family that's nearby. And things were going on with my family that they weren't even telling me about, because it's kind of like, oh, we were trying to save you the stress and having you stress out about stuff that you can't control because you're not even here in Charlotte to deal with it. But having to find out things way later was adding more stress than they knew. For example, my grandfather health was deteriorating, was doing really bad. Doctors were saying that he probably wouldn't live that much longer. Nobody told me anything. I moved back to Charlotte in June of 2019. So I was in Maryland for 2 years, and my grandfather passed away 1 week after I moved back to Charlotte. So, and he had been in the hospital for 2 weeks before I moved back, and nobody told me anything. Within the same time period, my father was diagnosed with prostate cancer. He at least told me that. And we were on FaceTime, and I'm just feeling helpless and like I have no support whatsoever. And I'm just in Baltimore with, there's nothing I can do. I can't even be close to my family to like spend time with them. Also weighing on my mental health. I felt like a lot of things were beyond my control, and I didn't have a way to effectively communicate. So I'm stressed out with, or not effectively communicate, but I felt like I didn't have a way to effectively cope with the stressors that I was experiencing. Traveling and going to get massages and stuff like that have always been one of my main ways of coping. And because things were so expensive in Maryland, I felt like I should probably be trying more to save money instead of spending it on those ways that I practice self care and cope. But then as a result, my mental health is suffering because I need to spend money in order to practice the self care that I'm accustomed to practicing, but I don't have enough money to put towards that, or that's what I told myself mentally. And so the stress was building up repeatedly. I started feeling like people didn't understand what I was going through, and that the best way to explain it, I think, is that I felt like I was completely alone, even when people were checking in on me and telling me that they were there for me and they could support in any way I needed them to. I would just have to communicate how they could help. But I really felt like I was in a room full of people, and it was like I'm drowning and I'm kicking and I'm screaming and battling in the water, and the room is full and everybody's looking at me, but they just carry on with their lives and keep their conversations going. So it's like they turn their back on me and I'm in the background drowning and nobody pays any attention to it. While I was not suicidal, it did cross my mind that things would be easier and life would be better if I was not here in life. And I never felt like I would take my own life or anything like that. But I was thinking, Lord, if I go to sleep and don't ever wake up, I would be perfectly okay with it. And that was a really low place to be. I think also seasonal depression counted into that as well because for some reason in Maryland it gets darker way earlier than it does in Charlotte. So of course when fall and winter hit, it gets dark earlier. So it starts getting dark in Charlotte around like 5:15, 5:30 when it first goes back to daylight savings time ending. But in Maryland, it would start getting dark around like 4:30 p.m. and I'm just not with it. I'm one of those people who need sunlight, and my ability to be in the sun or see the sun really impacts my mood. And so someone recommended a happy light, which has been beneficial, but I haven't really experienced seasonal depression as much now that I'm back in Charlotte and got my mental health together and seen a therapist. But at the time, the winter was way worse. And I know that I was causing my mom and my sister a little bit of stress because it's like I'm responding to you when you reach out just to let you know that I'm alive and I'm okay, but I don't really want to carry on a full blown conversation because if I talk to you and talk about my problems and how I'm feeling, I'm going to be sitting on the phone crying the entire time. And I know that it was functional depression because I was able to get up and go to work and carry on like nothing was going on. But as soon as I got back home, I would be at home crying and I wouldn't even know why I was crying. So I think the best thing for me was to move back to Charlotte. And so I told my supervisor at the time that, hey, I'm considering going back home. And I just wanted to let you know that that's on my mind so that you can start mentally preparing to replace me should I decide that I don't want to stay here any longer. We had that type of relationship. And so a couple weeks after thinking about it and looking for jobs in other places, I decided, yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and put in my resignation. I resigned like over a month before my last day would be, so it gave my supervisor ample time to start the search for a new person to replace me. Um, I was looking for a job in North Carolina. It wasn't necessarily in Charlotte. So when I first started looking, I didn't have in my mind that I'm absolutely going to live in Charlotte. It would be great if I could find a job in Charlotte, but I was looking at the state as a whole and applying to a lot of campus positions. And ultimately, I got a lot of interviews and I would make it to the final round, but each time it's like, we picked someone who had more experience. We picked someone who had more experience. And it started getting closer to the time where I was supposed to move back, and I didn't have a job secured. And I had to think about, would staying just for the sake of having a job at the detriment of my mental health be better than going home and having no job? And ultimately, my decision was to go home regardless. And my parents allowed me to move back in with them. So I while I got myself together, kept looking for a job, they didn't charge me anything to stay there, and so I stayed with them to get myself together. It took me like 6 months to find a job, but I did finally find one, and I feel like making it home that week before my grandfather passed away was exactly where God wanted me to be. And that's the reason that I felt so drawn and compelled to, even though I didn't have a job, drop everything that I had and move back to North Carolina because it gave me the opportunity to say goodbye, essentially. And that was really good for my mental health. Now, while I moved back, those 6 months that I didn't have a job, I basically put myself on punishment. Like, no, yeah, you have money in your savings account, but you have no way of replacing it. So please don't go out here spending all this money. I pretty much stayed in the house, and my mom was like, well, why don't you get out and do this and do that and hang out with your friends? Ma'am, with what money? Like, I don't want to spend and not have a way to replace it, and then I'd be dependent on my parents. So the entire time that I was unemployed, I didn't ask them for anything. I didn't ask for any money. I didn't need any help to pay anything as far as bills go that I had outside of living costs, because I had money saved up and I was able to sustain myself even in unemployment, which was a plus for me because I don't like asking people for stuff. And then when I did find a job, the world shut down for COVID. So I'm really glad that I got my mental health and well being together before the world shut down, because I feel like that could have sent me on another downward spiral. But because I was able to move back, get myself together, I got into a better mental health space. And so far, since then, I haven't had any major mental health issues since early 2019. And I'm really proud of myself for going to therapy and being able to process my thoughts and feelings in a more productive way, and finding coping mechanisms that don't necessarily require money. And I think I'm on a really good track to do better, be the best version of myself. And yeah, I am definitely an advocate for mental health. So if you have any issues you want to talk through, I strongly encourage getting a therapist. It doesn't mean that something is wrong with you. It could just mean that you're having a season where you're struggling. Even if you don't have a therapist or want to talk to a therapist, make sure that you have some type of support system and have formulated ways that you can cope with your feelings. Let me know down below what are some strategies that you use to cope with mental health issues and stress. And let me know what your thoughts are on things that I've talked about. Have you experienced anything like this? Like, comment, subscribe, and until next time, stay healthy and stay well. Bye.